I initiated the original workshop because I do storytelling in the theatre, and so we put out we just put out the word that anyone could do the workshop, and it had a Australian Asian theme, so that was the only criteria. But you didn't actually have to be Asian to do it, but you had to have an Asian story. And so we got 6 people to do the workshop, and that was the beginning of this group of 6 people. Well, just a story that's interesting. And so as part of the process when we were doing the workshops, I'd say we'd get people to tell their stories, and usually people tell long rambling stories which are all over the place. That's just the way it happens, because people haven't quite formulated their stories or their ideas, and so there's this great rambling outburst. And I'd ask the people in the rest of the group, what incident do you remember most from that story? And they'd say, oh, the incident where whatever. And then we'd kind of work around that and work out a series of events which are like stepping stones, which each of them which furthered the narrative and moved it forward in time. And so it is quite a simple process, actually, that you just string a story together.
I'm sure it's a lot more complicated than that. But
well, it isn't any more complicated than that, but that is a kind of skill, just to pick the right stories. And most of our time we spend editing the stories to make them short. I don't think there's any tradition. In fact, there's probably no tradition. But stories are, but there is a tradition of storytelling, which is stories are handed down, and they are quite simple stories. Like when you tell a story, they do get pared down, so that they are essentially simple, and quite a large part of the story is actually being told the story by the person. And so it's actually quite a strong experience, because there's a very direct link between the teller and the audience, and especially if we've got the storyteller on stage as a very real thing. It's not an actor. But also we use technology a bit with the photographs. That's perhaps my innovation for it, to get people to rummage through their photographs and bring out the photographs, because that's how I started off with, which was storytelling with image projection. So the images help enormously with the stories, even though sometimes the images are quite spare, like people don't have photos to illustrate every part of their life, so we've just had to leave photographs up. But by and large, I'm quite pleased with the images that we're putting up, because they're all quite evocative. Well, they're all cross-cultural stories. All of them begin not in Australia, and from various backgrounds, mainly Chinese for this lot. But there are people who were born in Malaysia, or Malaya as it was then, and there's a person from India. So it is an Asian cross mix, and they all at various times came to Australia. Some of them were born in Australia, but in fact I think most of them were born overseas. Well, just to give people an idea of cultural diversity, that not everybody has the same backgrounds or comes from the same, comes from a different cultural background, so that not everyone comes from a British Anglo-Australian background.
Do you think there are stereotypes people have about the Asian Australian experience?
I think people stereotype everything actually, but when you actually hear a story that from these 6 storytellers, you'll realise that their stories and even their experience of the same country is very different.
Well, what are those common threads?
I suppose in this one, because we're from a kind of arts kind of background, it's all our forebears, or all the forebears of the storytellers, had hard lives, definitely had quite hard lives. World War II comes into many of the stories. But they've all kind of worked through their hardship, all the storytellers, in their own story, and they've found some kind of expression of themselves through art. There are 2 performers. There's a visual artist, or 2 visual artists, and a writer and a community person. So they've all used their backgrounds and made a go of their lives.
What do you think is in it for them? What can they get out of this?
Well, everyone likes a good story. You'll hear a good story, and I think that you'll find quite a broad cross-section of humanity, from very difficult stories, from people who've, if you were a woman growing up in China, for example, that's a difficult situation to be in, so you'll hear a story like that. And you'll hear funny stories and tragic stories and sad stories. So it's a bit like theatre. There's a bit of laughter and tears.